Welcome to the Deep Fear channel. Watch closely, stay alert, and don't forget to subscribe. Story 1. The Lake House Guest Book. When Daniel pulled his car into the gravel driveway of the old lake house, he felt a wave of calm wash over him. The still water stretched endlessly in front of the property, reflecting the bruised purple evening sky. He had rented the cabin for a full month, time away from the city, away from work, away from everything that had been suffocating him. The house was older than the listing pictures made it seem. Weathered wood siding peeled at the corners, and the porch sagged slightly toward the lake, as though it had been leaning forward for decades, desperate to touch the water. Inside, it smelled faintly of mildew and pine cleaner. The first thing he noticed, though, wasn't the furniture or the creaking floorboards. It was the small leather-bound book sitting on a table in the entryway. The book was thick, its cover dark brown and warped from moisture. On the front, embossed in gold, were the words, "The Guest Book." Curious, Daniel opened it. The first few pages were filled with signatures. Dates went back decades, some as old as the 1950s. Each entry had a name, sometimes a short note. "Love the fishing here. Beautiful place. Carl Henderson, 1978. The water is colder than it looks. Emily W., 1991. Staying forever. Unknown. No date." That last one made him pause. The handwriting was jagged, scrawled across the page with an intensity that felt almost violent. Shaking his head, Daniel chuckled nervously and closed the book. Probably some prank by a teenager who had stayed here before. He carried his bags into the bedroom, cooked himself a simple dinner, and by the time night fell, the lake outside had turned into a black mirror. He found himself staring out at it through the porch window. No ripples disturbed the surface, no insects skated across it. It was too still, too perfect. When he finally crawled into bed, he swore he heard something faint, the sound of pages turning in another room. Daniel woke to the sound of dripping water. At first, he thought it was rain, but when he opened his eyes, he saw the ceiling above was dry. The sound came from the hallway. Slowly, he sat up and listened. Drip, drip, drip. The air felt damp. His skin was clammy, as though he had been sleeping in a fog. He walked into the hallway barefoot, shivering against the chill. That's when he noticed it. Across the wooden floorboards, leading from the front door to the entryway table, were wet footprints. Bare, human-shaped prints, each one darkening the wood as though someone had just stepped out of the lake. Daniel froze. His eyes darted to the table. The guest book was open. The pages fluttered faintly, though no breeze passed through the cabin. He stepped closer, hesitant. A fresh entry had appeared, the ink still glistening. Daniel, September 25th, 2025, staying forever. His stomach dropped. He hadn't written that. He hadn't even touched the book since last night. The footprints ended at the table. There was no sign of anyone else in the house. Swallowing hard, Daniel closed the book and slammed it shut. His hands trembled as he placed it back on the table. "This is ridiculous," he whispered to himself. "It's a trick. Maybe the owner, maybe some caretaker messing with me." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The next day, Daniel tried to shake off the unease. He went fishing at the edge of the dock, cooked lunch, and even hiked a short trail around the lake. But everywhere he went, he felt watched. That night, he checked the locks twice before going to bed. He left the guest book closed, but at 2:17 a.m., he woke again. The sound of water sloshing. Heart hammering, he crept down the hall. The footprints had returned, but this time they trailed not just from the door to the table. They led toward his bedroom. Daniel's throat tightened. He backed up slowly, glancing behind him. The prints stopped just outside his door. Whoever, whatever, was leaving them hadn't entered, but had stood there, watching. His gaze snapped to the table. The guest book was open again. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't resist. "Why don't you come outside?" The letters bled across the page as though written in water. Daniel slammed the book shut again and shoved it inside a drawer. He couldn't stay here another night. The following morning, Daniel tried to leave. He packed his bags, threw them in the trunk of his car, and drove down the gravel road that wound through the trees. But after 15 minutes, he realized something impossible. He was back at the cabin. The driveway crunched beneath his tires, the lake stretching endlessly ahead. He stared at the house, blood draining from his face. Somehow, the road had looped back. He tried again, took a different path, turned at a fork, drove until the gas gauge dipped low. But no matter which way he turned, the tree swallowed him and spat him back out at the same cursed lake house. By dusk, Daniel sat in his car trembling, the gas nearly empty. He had no choice but to go back inside. And there it was, the book waiting for him on the table, already open. "You can't leave. You signed." His own name gleamed back at him in wet ink. Daniel didn't remember signing. He knew he hadn't signed. But the ink didn't lie. His name was etched there in his own handwriting, identical to the scrawl he used at work. He grabbed the book and hurled it across the room. It slammed against the wall and fell open on the floor. The pages fluttered, stopping on the one with his name. He could swear the letters shimmered, pulsing faintly like veins beneath the skin. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He bolted into the bedroom, yanking his bag open. He stuffed clothes back in, hands shaking so badly he could barely zip it. The sun had already fallen. Outside, the lake was dark glass again, the surface rippling even though no wind stirred. The sound came then, the slosh of footsteps on wet wood. From the porch, Daniel froze, his pulse roaring in his ears. Slowly, he crept to the window. At the edge of the dock, half shrouded in darkness, stood a figure. Its body was dripping, water cascading off it in rivulets. The head hung at an unnatural angle, and the clothes clung tight to its bloated frame. Though the details were hard to see, Daniel knew instantly what it was. One of the names in the guest book, one of the missing guests. The figure raised a hand, pointed toward him. Daniel stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The guest book, still lying open on the floor, turned its own pages with a rapid flutter. It stopped on a new line. Ink bled across the paper, writing itself, "Come join us in the water. Pisetinaturu netulites." The next hours blurred together. Daniel tried barricading the doors, tried ignoring the whispers. But each time he closed his eyes, he saw the reflection of the lake, saw faces just beneath the surface, pressing up against the water like glass. By 3 a.m., the sound of dripping filled the cabin again. This time, it wasn't footprints. It was rain inside the house. Droplets fell from the ceiling, soaking his clothes and hair. The air grew suffocatingly damp, and when he tried to breathe, the air burned with the sting of lake water in his lungs. He coughed, staggered, slipped, landing on the soaked wood floor. The guest book lay beside him. Its pages turned and turned until they stopped once more on his name. A second line appeared. Beneath it, "Taken." The world blurred. Daniel tried crawling toward the door, but the wood beneath him dissolved into black water. He plunged through, screaming, but no sound left his throat. The lake swallowed him whole. The next morning, the cabin looked empty again. The table in the entryway was dry. The air was calm. The guest book lay neatly closed, waiting. Later that afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. A young couple stepped out, smiling at the lake view. The woman picked up the leather-bound book, flipped it open, and pulled a pen from her purse. "Let's sign before we unpack," she said cheerfully. The man leaned over her shoulder, watching as she scrawled their names onto the waiting page. Far beneath the surface of the lake, Daniel opened his eyes. He pressed a hand against the invisible barrier of water, watching the couple through the reflection. He tried to scream, but only bubbles rose from his mouth. The lake already had him, and it was hungry for more. Story 2. Drowned Voices. The cabin by the lake was supposed to be a fresh start. After her divorce, Maya wanted peace and silence, a place to write, to heal, to forget. When she found the listing for the lake house, the pictures showed sunlight sparkling on calm water, pine trees stretching toward the sky, and a porch where she could drink her morning coffee. The realtor warned her the house was old-fashioned. Maya didn't care. She wanted isolation. The first day felt almost too perfect. She unpacked her books, set up her laptop by the window, and watched the lake shimmer through the trees. When night came, she lay in bed, lulled by the sound of crickets. But at 1:36 a.m., she woke. At first, she thought it was the house settling. Then she realized it was a whisper, soft, wet, as though carried on bubbles from underwater. She sat up, straining to listen. The sound came from beneath the floorboards. Her pulse quickened. The house was built directly on the edge of the lake, half of it suspended on old wooden stilts. Maybe it was just the water sloshing beneath, maybe fish, maybe reeds. But then she heard it clearly. Words. "Help! Please! Let us in!" Maya froze. The voice was low, distorted, but unmistakably human. She pressed her ear to the floor. Water dripped upward through the cracks, dampening her cheek. When she bolted upright, her heart hammering, the whisper stopped. She barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, Maya convinced herself she had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, the loneliness of a new place. She tried to distract herself with writing. But every time she paused, she thought she heard faint murmurs just at the edge of hearing, like someone talking underwater. By the second night, there was no denying it. The voices came again, louder this time. She lay rigid in her bed as whispers rose from the floor, overlapping, too many voices to count. We drowned. We drowned. Cold. Dark. Don't want to be alone. Let us breathe. Her breath hitched. She clapped her hands over her ears, but the voices pressed through anyway, vibrating in her skull. When she opened her eyes, she saw it. Wet footprints seeping upward through the floorboards, as though someone beneath the house had stepped directly into her room. And then, the whispers stopped. Silence. Maya sat in the dark, shaking. She told herself she'd leave in the morning, but part of her couldn't look away from the floor, because even after the voices faded, the wood kept dripping. Maya woke to the smell of mildew. Morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, but the house was damp, sticky, as if it had rained indoors. She pulled the covers back and gasped. Her sheets were wet. Not soaked, not dripping, but damp enough that her skin stuck to the fabric. Her first thought, a broken pipe. But when she checked the bathroom, the sink and shower were dry. The kitchen, too. No leaks. When she pressed her palm to the floorboards in the bedroom, her hand came up slick with lake water. Her stomach twisted. She spent the morning outside trying to calm down. The lake looked so innocent in daylight. The surface sparkled, dragonflies skimming above it. A loon cried from across the water. Nothing about it suggested the voices, the footprints, the impossible dampness. But she couldn't ignore the truth. The house was breathing the lake in. That night, she set up her phone on the dresser to record audio while she slept. If she could capture proof of the voices, maybe she could make sense of it, or at least prove to herself she wasn't losing her mind. She woke again at 1:30, right on time. The whispers started soft, like someone speaking through cupped hands underwater. Then louder, dozens of voices overlapping, crying, begging. She squeezed her eyes shut, trembling, so cold. "Hold us! Join us! Join us! Join us!" Maya covered her ears, but the voices only grew louder. The sound vibrated through her bones. She forced her eyes open and froze. The bedroom floor was warping. Boards swelled upward, bulging as though something beneath was pressing against them. Dark water seeped through the seams, running in rivulets across the floor. Then came the hands. Pale, bloated fingers pushed up through the gaps, nails scraping wood, pulling. One hand, then another, dozens all clawing for escape. The boards cracked, water spraying upward in thin streams. Maya screamed, stumbling back against the wall. For a split second, she saw faces rising beneath the surface of the floorboards, like looking down into a shallow pool. Gray, swollen faces with gaping mouths, eyes staring blindly upward. She grabbed the nearest thing she could, a lamp, and hurled it at the floor. It shattered, sparks popping, and the vision vanished. The wood was solid again, dry, untouched. Her chest heaved as she gasped for breath. On the dresser, her phone recording light blinked red. The next morning, she listened to the recording. At first, nothing. Just silence, the occasional shift of bedsheets. Then, right at 1:36 a.m., the whispers began. Clear, terrifying. "Let us in. The water is rising. We'll trade places." Maya dropped the phone, her hands shaking. She couldn't stay here. Not another night. She packed frantically, shoving clothes into her suitcase. She'd drive back to town, demand the realtor take the house back, anything to get away. But when she opened the front door, her breath caught. The lake had risen. Water lapped at the bottom step of the porch. The dock was nearly submerged. She hadn't heard rain, hadn't seen a storm, but the lake was swallowing the land. And from somewhere across the water came a sound she couldn't mistake. Children laughing. Maya slammed the door shut, chest heaving. The water was rising, swallowing the steps outside. She didn't understand how. There'd been no rain, no storm, but the lake crept closer by the minute, as if it were reaching for the house. She backed away from the door. The air inside was thick with moisture, so damp it stung her lungs. Drops of water rolled down the walls, collecting into dark streaks. And then the voices returned. This time they weren't muffled whispers. They came loud, clear, surrounding her. "Help us! It's your turn. Breathe for us. Maya clapped her hands over her ears. Shut up, she screamed. You're not real. The floorboards groaned. A long crack split across the living room, water spraying upward like a burst pipe. She stumbled back, watching in horror as the boards bent, bulging upward. A hand broke through. Then another. Dozens. Pale, swollen, dripping hands clawed their way into the house. Fingernails scraped wood, pulling themselves forward. Maya ran for the kitchen, grabbing the heaviest knife she could find. But when she turned back, the living room wasn't just wet wood anymore. It was a lake. Dark, endless water spread where the floor had been, rippling under the ceiling lights. And faces rose up from its surface, gray and bloated, mouths open in endless screams. Their eyes rolled upward, fixed on her. She stumbled back. The water was everywhere now, flooding across the floor toward her feet. No, she whispered. No, this isn't real. But the cold against her ankles said otherwise. The voices roared, echoing in her skull. One breath. Just one. Maya turned and bolted for the stairs. She scrambled upward, clutching the railing, but the wood was slick with moisture. Behind her, water surged higher, lapping at her legs. By the time she reached the top of the staircase, it was waist-deep. The faces pressed closer, stretching up through the water, their mouths opening wider, as though trying to inhale her. She slammed the bedroom door shut, dragging a chair against it. Her chest heaved as she backed away. But the water was already seeping under the door, trickling in faster and faster. Maya spun towards the window. Outside, the lake shimmered. Or, no, not shimmered, boiled. Thousands of bubbles erupted across the surface as if the lake were alive. And then she saw them. Figures standing on the dock. Children, men, women. Their clothes soaked, their heads tilted at impossible angles. They stared up at her window in silence. Her throat went dry. She stumbled back, tripping over the bed frame. The voices inside the room rose into a deafening chorus, vibrating through the walls. The water surged under the door. It was at her knees now, at her waist, at her chest. "No!" she screamed, thrashing toward the window. She smashed the glass with a lamp, shards raining outward. Cold air rushed in. She climbed onto the sill, desperate to jump. But when she looked down, her heart froze. The house wasn't surrounded by land anymore. It was floating in the middle of the lake. Endless black water stretched in all directions, swallowing the trees, the shore, everything. The figures on the dock were gone. Only the lake remained, rippling like a giant mouth waiting to close. The voices hissed in her ears. "Your turn, Maya. Your turn to drown." Water closed over her head. She tried to scream, but the sound bubbled away into silence. The next morning, the lake was still again. Calm, sparkling beneath the sun. The cabin looked untouched. No broken glass, no water damage, only silence. But if you pressed your ear to the floorboards at night, if you listened very closely, you could hear her voice among the others. "Help me. Please, I can't breathe." Story 3. The Silent Dock. When Lucas and his 3 friends rented the lake house for the weekend, they thought it would be all beers, fishing, and lazy afternoons. The place was old but charming. Peeling paint, creaky steps, the faint smell of cedar smoke in the walls. It came with a long wooden dock stretching out into the lake, a perfect place to sit with their feet in the water. But the first thing they noticed was the dock was never empty. When they arrived that Friday evening, someone was standing at the end of it, a tall figure facing the water. Too far to make out details, just a silhouette against the sinking sun. "Hey," Lucas called, "is this place private?" The figure didn't answer, didn't move, just kept staring at the lake. When the group went inside to drop off their bags and came back out 5 minutes later, the dock was empty. That night, after grilling burgers and drinking too much, they went outside again. And there it was, the figure standing silently on the dock, this time closer, only halfway down. "It's probably some neighbor," one of his friends muttered, "locals creeping around." But there were no other houses nearby. The next cabin was a mile down the road. Lucas called out again, "Hey man, private property." No response. They got spooked enough to go back inside. By the time they peeked again through the window, the dock was empty. Still, nobody slept well that night. Every time Lucas stirred awake, he swore he heard faint footsteps on the wooden boards outside, slow and deliberate, as if someone paced the dock all night long. The next morning, they checked the dock in daylight. Nothing. No footprints. No sign anyone had been there. "Maybe we were just drunk," one of his friends said. But that night, the figure returned. Always the same, silent, standing, watching the water. Lucas finally worked up the nerve. He grabbed a flashlight and stormed down the dock. His friends shouted after him, but he ignored them. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. The light fell on the figure, and for the first time, Lucas saw its face, or rather, its lack of one. The skin was waterlogged, gray and smooth, as though the lake itself had scrubbed away the features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a dripping, bloated head on a human body. Lucas staggered back in horror. The figure tilted its head at him. Then, in complete silence, it stepped backward and slid into the lake without a ripple. That night, none of them dared sleep. They huddled inside, whispering, "This place is messed up," one friend muttered. "We should leave at dawn." But when dawn came, the road out was washed out by fallen trees. No cell service, no way to call for help. And then they saw it. Not one figure on the dock, but 5, all standing shoulder to shoulder, silent, faceless, dripping lake water onto the boards. One for each of them. Panic set in. They barricaded the doors, kept watch with knives and fireplace pokers, but the dock figures never left. Day or night, they stood there, patient, unmoving. By the second night, the group began to unravel. One friend swore he heard his name whispered from the dock, though the figures' mouths were sealed smooth. Another claimed he saw his own reflection among them. By the third night, one of them broke. At 2 a.m., Lucas woke to the creak of the porch door. He ran outside just in time to see his friend walking calmly down the dock, as if in a trance. The faceless figure opposite him stepped forward, arms outstretched. Before Lucas could reach him, the lake swallowed them both. No splash, no scream, just silence. The next morning, the dock held 4 figures. One by one, the group dwindled. Each night, another friend walked willingly into the lake, greeted by their silent twin. Lucas tried to fight it, tried to hold them back. But each time the water pulled harder, the silence heavier, until he was alone. The 4th night, he sat awake, knife trembling in his hand. When he finally looked out the window, he saw the last figure waiting on the dock. It wasn't faceless anymore. It was him. His own reflection stood there, dripping, smiling without a mouth. And despite every part of him screaming to run, Lucas felt his body move on its own, step by step, out of the cabin, down the dock, into the waiting arms of the lake. The last thing he felt was silence. Endless, suffocating, silent. The following weekend, another group rented the lake house. They laughed about fishing, unpacked their bags, and pointed at the long wooden dock stretching out into the water. "Creepy, huh?" one of them joked. "It looks like someone standing at the end of it." When they squinted against the sunlight, they saw it too. A figure, silent, waiting.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe.